All right, we're live. All right, people are
All
in
right.
big confusion. What's up, Rich?
What's up?
I'm Jack Mangan. I'm not rocking a hat today, so you get to see all of my head. I am not wearing a metal shirt. I'm actually rocking some Old Roots PodCamp. This 15-year-old shirt. Back to my podcasting days. I'm not going to talk too much, but you know me from the Am I Evil graphic novel, which we just sent out the prose version this week, which Rich, you got that right? Yeah.
Yep.
So you out
Looks
there?
great. Yep.
Even
Thanks.
if you, yeah, cool. If you're not, if you're interested, if you're not a backer and you're interested, then hit me up. But also, Rich and I are also board members of the Metal Hall of Fame, and of course, Rich is the founder of MetalAsylum.net, which I've been privileged to, write for Rich for 10 years or so. So that's me.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. And
there.
Rich from Metal Asylum, and I write for Brave Words also, and I contribute to Sea of Tranquility sometimes too, and I write for the Metal Hall of Fame. So tonight, which we've talked about before, right? I don't know if we did at the Asylum or here about the articles that we write for the Metal Hall that are either in the MetalLegacy. If you don't know the categories, there's MetalLegacy and Metal Today. So we talk about all the legacy bands in MetalLegacy, and then Metal Today, we talk about the more current bands from the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And one of the ones that you wrote, that one of the first ones was the Quiet Riot one, which we spoke about.
Right.
In the MetalLegacy. Right. And then you got the Iron Maiden, Rhyme of Ancient Mariner one. You wrote about that.
Right.
And you did one for Led Zeppelin.
Yep.
And then come to the, what's that?
There's an open letter to Led Zeppelin.
Right. And then the two that I did, one in October and then one at the end of November, which was the German metal. One was called Power Metal, the Germans part one, and then just German metal part two, because we're not putting everybody in the category of being power metal.
Right, exactly. And yeah, so what we're doing here is Rich and I are we still do interviews and we still have topics, but right now we're doing and we do some live streams through MetalAsylum.net as well, but we're doing the topics that we've written about. So we're doing live streams to discuss them live and get you guys to chime in. Maybe you can learn something from Rich, the scholar over here. And yeah, so we're going to discuss it. And as Rich said, we did the first article we covered was It was called Wild, Wild, Wild with Quiet Riot. It was just talking about their meteoric, their crazy rise to the top of the charts.
Which we do have Quiet Riot or
you went.
I'm still here. We froze up for a minute.
Yeah, you went robotic.
Yeah. So the bands that we talk about in these articles are not always inducted. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but we talk about our reasoning for why we feel they should be inducted. Correct?
Yeah. Or, honestly, we're talking metal history. I mean, it's not always going to be about the hall. Of course it's connected to the hall, but yeah, we'll talk about great bands, whether they're in the hall, whether they don't have a chance of making the hall someday. We'll talk about that. Right. So it's good articles.
Or maybe think about consider them being inducted based off of what we wrote about, right?
Certainly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and as Todd Bushy says, Frankie B, I met him very briefly in passing at the very first Metal Hall of Fame. It was what it was called, the Hall of Heavy Metal History, and he was just the nicest, most down-to-earth, humble guy. He was not at all rock star, like too good for the room at all. So it was amazing. Really, he and Rudy Sarzo were just the nicest guys ever. Again, I don't claim to know them, you know what I mean, or be friends, but yeah, just super guys. And actually, also a guy I interact with a little bit at that hall. See, I'm setting you up, Rich. Ready for the setup? I talked to Mickey D a little bit at that first one. So Mickey D, of course, was part of. He actually accepted the award on behalf of
the Scorpions,
even though he's a brand, relatively brand new member. Right. But now Rich did not, in the two articles on the Metal Hall of Fame site, Rich did not touch on the Scorpions. But I'm sorry.
But of course, obviously, well, they were inducted, so that's why I didn't include them. And then, of course, the next name is going to be Accept, which aren't inducted yet, but obviously they're hopefully going to be on some level, in the future too. Everybody knows those two names, so I didn't feel like I needed to talk about them in the articles.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're not on trial. Yeah, I mean,
No,
two
but
household names,
everybody's going to
absolutely.
ask. Everybody's going to ask, why didn't you include them? Because I
Yeah,
thought they were the obvious choices. And I think these other bands, maybe a few of them are obvious choices, but maybe they just need a little more. The fans maybe need a little more encouragement to have them be inducted.
right. All right, well, man, you're the man of the hour here. So tell us, why don't you get us
All
started
right.
talking about some of the bands in your articles? I know that you called out 6, but of course this is a huge sprawling thing. So go for it.
There is. Well, the part 1 was Helloween, Gravedigger, and Running Wild. Obviously, after accepting the Scorpions, you're going to have. I would say the next name is Helloween, right?
Yeah, right.
I would
One
say.
of the best bands in metal and music history.
And I think Running Wild is another big name, even though they haven't toured America in I don't know how many years, a couple decades, but unfortunately, they never tour here. And then Gravedigger, who comes here once in a while. I think those are the next 3 names I think people would consider to be important to be inducted into the Hall. Wouldn't you say? Based on your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, we could debate, if you're talking about who needs to be inducted, we could debate Gravedigger and Running Wild, who are both worthy. I'm not saying they're not worthy, but but Helloween to me is just one of the pinnacles.
Yeah, of course, they're the first choice, right? Like Walls of Jericho is what, 84, 85? Yeah, with the EP.
Right. Yeah. Well, right. They were among the first, and yeah, just massive band.
Yeah. And they
one of the greatest, and they
power
influenced
metal.
everyone. Yeah, and then they had branches go off in all kinds of different directions with Gamma Ray, eventually Unisonic. Right. But yeah, I mean, Helloween themselves, the core band with Michael Kiske and then of course later with Andy Darris, just mammoths. I mean, almost as they're the Beatles of the power metal genre for sure.
Yeah, they're the inventors. So I figured mentioning them just because they're the next biggest, I would say, after Scorpions and Accept, and they invented the genre. So aside from them, if you're not familiar with Gravedigger and Running Wild, they started out at the same time, so they've been around since 84, 85 with their first couple records.
But let me ask you a question. And again, you're the scholar. This is Rich. Rich is the scholar here. But so
for the power metal,
probably fair to say that Gravedigger really kind of came into their own more in the '90s when metal was kind of second stage. That's really when Gravedigger. Running Wild, I think in the '80s they hit their stride a little bit earlier. Is that a fair statement? You think?
Yes. Yeah, because in the '90s when Gravedigger started doing the more power metal style with Tunes of War and Knights of the Cross and Excalibur, that's when they really got into their groove. They still have great records before that, like Symphony of Death, The Reaper, and Heart of Darkness are great records. But they're not power metal records. They're speed metal, traditional metal records, which they're great. I love the 2 sides of Gravedigger. You get the one side that's that, and then you got the other albums that are power metal albums. So
yeah.
I talk about that in the article, how they have their 2 sides. Put a couple good links in there, like them playing Rebellion at the Wacken Open Air Festival in Germany. And all those people there, did you see that clip?
I did, yeah. That's pretty crazy.
With Hansi from Blind Guardian singing with them?
Yeah. Yeah, who we've got to at least touch on Blind Guardian before we're done here
today. I think, of course, they should be inducted at some point as well. But I wanted to start, in the beginning, go with the 80s and these bands first, the earlier ones.
Yeah, of course.
Because Blind Guardian, even though Blind Guardian did put out 2 records in the 80s, you know that, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, I was not aware of them until 90s. I mean, honestly.
90s, yeah. I think most of us. But Follow the Blind and what was the first album? It's escaping me right now. But the first 2 albums were like 88, 89. So they've been around a long time too. And Gamma Ray, after Kai Hansen left Helloween, their first album came out in 90. Heading for Tomorrow.
Oh, I was thinking later in the 90s. I guess because was it Chameleon or Pink Bubbles Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
at the
that
time
was
when
91, 92, 93, that part period. And Gamma
yeah,
Ray put out Heading for Tomorrow, Sigh No More, and Insanity and Genius with Ralph Sheepers from Primal Fear singing with them on those first three albums. Which, I know we're going off on a tangent here, but it's still important. Which, if you get the Gamma Ray 30-year anniversary concert, it's excellent. They got a great selection of songs that they do from the first few records up to the more recent records, and Ralph Sheepers comes out and sings with them also.
you call out well, not necessarily Primal Fear. You call out Sinner in the second article, right? I mean,
Right. But I figure
ahead?
we'll talk about the three first that are in the part one, and then we'll get into what I did for part two. So
right, yeah.
part one was Helloween, Gravedigger, and Running Wild, which Running Wild started the pirate metal theme into the power metal, and they've been doing that since Under Jolly Roger. Did you know that one? That record? That's where they started it?
Death or Glory. I probably, I'm a little fuzzy on the back catalog.
Okay.
Although I will
So
say,
yeah, it was under Jolly Roger. I don't think I have it here. There's Under Jolly Roger and Port Royal, which
that's a different pirate metal, though. Sorry to talk over you. That's a different pirate metal, though. When people think pirate metal, they're thinking Storm and this kind of the recent trend. But this is predates that by 30 years, and it's not really the same.
Invented it. They created. They did the niche,
Right.
We're talking about that, but it's great. Running Wilds. They're very cool what they do with their style, how they did it into the power metal with the hymns and the themes and the melodies, especially those guitars that they do in their songs. They create that pirate melody and that sing-along chorus with those guitars and the big hooks.
Yeah.
So another band, it's been since 83, 84, 85, and have been around. They're still making records to this day. Another important band that should be considered to be inducted. I think many people wouldn't argue that, right?
Right.
When you say,
and it's just from a listener standpoint, I think they're very Helloween. That's the thing. One thing we have to call out. I mean, it's just
here's the first time I heard.
Yeah, and the first time I heard them, first time I heard Blind Guardian, I thought, wow, these guys sound a lot like Helloween. I mean, that's not a diss on any of those fans, but
this album, Follow the Blind. Yeah, they're very influenced by early Helloween.
Yeah. Well, same. Yeah. Running Wild for sure. Most of these bands that we were going to talk about, like, jumping way ahead, like Ed Guy. I mean, all these bands, you hear.
Yeah.
Like, these are
the speed, the double bass, the guitar harmonies, the melodies. Right. That all comes from Helloween. But Gravedigger and Running Wild were different than Helloween. Helloween, Michael Kiske had a different voice. He was more melodic and a higher singer. Chris and Rolf from Running Wild, grittier voices, but still melodic singers when you get to the chorus.
Chris actually definitely has some Udo in him. When another countryman does.
His voice is definitely an acquired taste. But as the records went on and they did more of the power metal records, his voice got more melodic, and especially for the choruses. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they still go ahead.
I was just I'm agreeing with you that you can't really understate, especially Helloween, but even Running Wild and Gravedigger, they're maybe not household names, or maybe not even first tier acts, but they've been around for a long time. They've stood the test of time, and they have absolutely.
And they're still very important to the evolution of heavy metal and their stamp that they made with their records. Right. I was going to say with the power metal side for Gravedigger, you have the first album, Heavy Metal Breakdown, which is your speed metal, but then they incorporate that in later records, like the Gravedigger. Have you ever heard that one? Which is a later record from the 2000s.
I think I heard that one. That one came out. Was that this decade or the
2002, 2003, somewhere around there?
Okay.
I love this album. A lot of Edgar Allan Poe bass songs in this. It's dark, it's heavy, but it's still got melody to it. Love that album.
Actually, I want to
What's
two
that?
quick comments. Two quick comments is, yeah, I mean, well, first, before I talk about Gravedigger, it turns out that Vinny Appice is live now, so we might lose some people. I don't
Okay.
have my hair. I don't have the mustaches or the appeal of Vinny Appice, but we'll keep the conversation going here.
Okay.
But yeah, I was gonna say also what I like. Another thing I like about Gravedigger is that, like Iron Maiden, they have very literate, very historical focused,
Yes.
smart lyrics. So that the cool
Yes.
subject matter.
I forgot to mention that. All mostly historical themes for all their albums and concepts from the power metal album, the power metal albums.
Well, and since I brought that up, I mean, and again, I don't want to dominate. I want you to, but I mean, I also love Helloween's storytelling. When we talk about
like Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 1 and 2 and 3.
Yeah. Which
but with these bands, especially with Helloween, they're not, which I've always said this before, they're not one-trick ponies. They have different records, they have different types of songs. They're not all fast, double bass, upbeat, twin guitar harmonies, those I Want Outs and Save Us and March of Time and A Little Time. It's not all the same type of songs. They have different types of songs, slower, epics, ballads. They even do albums like Unarmed, which is so cool, where they do like stripped down jazz, blues, soul, classical versions of their own songs, right?
Yeah, love
and then you got Chameleon, which is just totally different. It's like almost like pop rock at some points and Beatles-esque,
Yeah. Yeah, Todd's telling us to join in on the Vinny piece. He's great, but we're gonna do our thing. We're gonna do our discussion. But
we're not gonna be on too long.
Yeah, we won't be too much longer. Yeah, you guys can catch us, and maybe I'll jump over there depending on where dinner is in my house. But yeah, the guy is a freaking legend. I got one more.
So anything we want to touch upon from the first article with Helloween, Gravedigger, and Running Wild?
Well, I was gonna say one. You made an interesting point. It's true of power metal, but power metal. There are bands that do stick to the template, and after a while, you're kind of like, all right, it's getting too repetitive. So that's why what's great about the bands we're talking about, where you got to mix it up. If it's the same,
right.
180 BPM, double bass beat, after a while, it's like, okay, like if every song on Keeper was Save Us, Save Us is a special song to me, but if every song was Save Us, it loses. So yeah,
but it's not. Even with Gravedigger and Running Wild, they still mix it up, even though Running Wild has a pirate theme to their songs, and Gravedigger either has darker lyrics and song titles or concept albums about historical events and history and things like that. There's still variety to the songs too. They're not all the same.
Exactly. Yeah, and Gravedigger does slower tempo. I mean, so does Helloween sometimes. But
yeah, and same thing with Gamma Ray, and same thing with Blind Guardian. There's variety. They're not one dimensional.
Right. Exactly. Well, yeah. Why don't we move on to the
part 2?
To the next. Yeah, let's move on to the part 2.
So part 2, we just titled it German metal because they're not power metal. They have their power metal moments, these 3 bands, I would say, definitely, but they're not really considered power metal, right? Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Warlock has always been considered a traditional metal band,
right?
But they have their power metal moments, I would say. And Warlock has Doro, who sings for them, Doro Pesch, who was inducted into the Metal Hall. But
exactly,
the albums, I guess, of Warlock are not inducted, correct? Is that the way I think it is?
Yeah, I believe Doro was inducted by herself, so I think Warlock is still
right. But I guess they're recognized. The band Warlock, I guess, could be considered recognized because she was the singer, right?
Right. Yeah, and and worthy. She is a true legend, and Warlock, of course, is great.
Yeah. But I think me and you have talked about this too. Even though maybe the band name isn't inducted, but the person from the band is inducted. Like Doro is inducted from Warlock. So maybe the whole band isn't inducted, but maybe in the future, there could be maybe an album, album selections from a band that could be inducted into the Metal Hall. So maybe it's not the whole history of all the members, but it's that moment in time, that album that's inducted, right? Which we thought was an interesting idea. So for them, it would be Triumph and Agony, their fourth album, which was a great album that has All We Are, right?
Right, which is such an anthem. But yeah, that's probably a better question for Pat Gesualdo. We'll have to have him come on one of these days and talk about that.
Right.
But
yeah. it's an interesting idea, because then you're not dealing with putting in the whole history of everyone. Like somebody could have just played on one album and never played on another album for a band, right?
Right.
But maybe a few albums from that band's history are important enough to be inducted into the Metal Hall. So then you're not having to worry about dealing with all these lineup changes, right?
Right, exactly. Or, let's face it, there have been some bands have had one massive major album and then a bunch of, kind of also rans.
Right.
So it happens. But, back to Doro, what I was going to say about Doro is that, unfortunately, in the U.S., she was kind of thrown at us as, hey, you guys like Lita Ford, here's another one. And she was in the U.S.
But Warlock was always traditional heavy metal, though, so I think it was a little bit different. They were a heavier, harder band, That's
how they were, right? And that's probably the main reason why, in terms of fame. I'm just talking about in terms of fame. Like everyone's heard "Kiss Me Deadly." Everyone, Lita Ford is a household name. Doro less so. In the metal community, of course, she is. But and I'm saying it's a shame that that's how it was marketed, because both of them. Lita is great too, especially her early days. But
the first two.
Yeah, I think
Out for Blood and Dance on the Edge. It's the second album. I want to say.
It's just a shame that it was marketed so it's like, oh, you like this gorgeous blonde woman who does heavy metal, you'll like this other gorgeous blonde woman who does heavy metal. It's like, well, I do like them both, but not. And yeah, of course, I was a boy. I had I had a Doro poster. Of course,
but I thought they were still both different, though. They were still,
Oh yeah.
Two different bands. What was? I'm gonna look up the album now. I'm pretty sure it's Dance on the Edge was the second Lita Ford album.
Yeah, I mean she was probably always going to go that route, but I mean still, kudos to her.
So in that part two,
good stuff.
In that part two, I talk about those first four Warlock albums and their importance. And when someone reads it, they can decide on what if all four of them are important or just Triumph and Agony. Just something to think about, right?
Let us know. I mean, I know a lot of people went over to watch Vinny, but let us know what you think about Warlock. Yeah, I mean, plus you're watching this on YouTube. You're watching this later on Facebook. Let us know your thoughts about Warlock history.
Two smaller bands, but still, one of them was pretty big. They're still big today, overseas and everything. Is Rage? Are you from? I don't know if you're too familiar with them or what.
I do know of them, and I did a little bit of I read your article, I did a little bit of homework, and I'm familiar with. I would say that, in my opinion, and maybe you're the scholar, so tell me if I'm wrong. There really are two. I'm talking about the band Rage. I'm not talking about Rage Against the Machine or any other Rages, but I'm saying the German band Rage. There really are two versions of them. There's the thrashier one, and then the symphonic one.
Yes, exactly. Just like Gravedigger has their speed metal side, and then they have their power metal side. Rage is similar, where they started out very speed metal and thrash metal. I even said in my article, those first few albums like Reign in Fear, Execution Guaranteed, Prayers of Steel, when they were called Avenger, I don't think too many people know that. They were called Avenger actually first. That's the first one before they went on to be Rage, and then you had Reign of Fear and Execution Guaranteed. So those first three albums are fast, heavy, aggressive, and very old, like Slayer, old Metallica, Kill 'Em All type of speed metal. But then as the records went on, when you get to, which is the third or fourth one, if you count Avenger, Perfect Man, when you get to that album from 1988, then they started mixing things up a little bit more with tempos and variety with their arrangements. Still, they were still fast and heavy, though. So when I wrote about it in the article, I said from that record from 1988, and I'm looking at their discography, they got a lot. Did you notice?
Yeah, quite.
There is, if I'm right, 21. 26 albums. That's a lot of albums from 1985 up to now. So from Perfect Man up to, I would say, End of Days, which is 1996. So that's like 10 years. It's a lot of fast, heavy songs. So I was honest. I said in my article, I said there's some killer, but there's a lot of filler there too, because that's a lot of albums.
Yeah.
You know, between the first album, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 albums there in 10 years. You know,
yeah, it's
a lot of music. But like you're saying, there's that symphonic side. So things changed in '96 when they did the album End of Days. They also did one called Linguna Mortis.
Yes, I like that one quite a bit.
Yes, and they've done that ever since they did it with the record next, which that's one of my favorite Rage albums. It's called 13. So they incorporate the orchestrations into their albums, aside from doing traditional metal songs and speed metal songs. So if you check out Linguna Mortis, I wrote this in the article too, that this is predating Kiss doing it, Metallica, Deep Purple, right? Who else did with the orchestras? Jimmy Borger did it, Avantasia.
Right.
So many people have since that time, right? Late 90s.
Yeah, no, it was really rare. I mean, it happened in rock and pop, you know, Zeppelin,
Right.
of course, but you're right, in the metal world, you know, yeah, they're definitely pioneers for sure.
Yes. Right. So if you go from, let me see, I got to go back to their discography now, because even being a fan, I can't remember all 26. I got to look at all the albums to remember where I'm going. So if you go from Linguna Mortis afterwards, so then you got 13, and then you got the albums Ghost and Welcome to the Other Side, which I really like. Sound Chaser is really good. Speak of the Dead, Strings to a Web. There's all these albums that came later that work in the orchestrations and the symphonic things, and it's very, very well done. They've done another album called LMO, which is Linguna Mortis Orchestra. So they did 2 of them.
Yeah, that's the one I like.
It's the later one. So they did the one first in '96, and they did another one in 2013.
Yeah, no, good stuff.
So, you know, where Gravedigger and Running Wild, you know, Running Wild kind of always did their thing with the pirate metal, didn't really work in too much orchestration. Gravedigger did their speed metal and traditional metal, but also branched out and did power metal, where they use orchestrations too, bagpipes, all kinds of stuff. Rage did the same type of thing, but they did it with like full orchestras, you know?
Right.
Which really expanded their songs.
Yeah. I mean, right. The versions of those songs are I think stronger. I mean, and again, I think you're right that a lot of bands, because like we said, the Beatles, the Stones, Zeppelin, it's not that no one had ever done it before. It's just, you know, when we heard that, it kind of blew open a lot of doors, I think, probably for metal bands to focus on doing this. You're right. Strings.
Metal bands have done it, you know, like Iron Maiden did it on Seventh Son, and Somewhere in Time they added, you know, keyboards, which added different dimensions and different sounds. But no one ever, I don't think anybody before Rage did this for the Laguna Mortis album in '96 with an actual orchestra.
Right. Well, yeah, not to this degree. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
You know, we could rattle off tons of bands. That's probably its own discussion. You know, symphonic metal, but yeah, I mean, to do the full orchestra, not have a string quartet come in or a small, even you know, even again, the Beatles didn't necessarily have a full symphonic orchestra, not all the time, but you know, you just have a couple of musicians come in. So yeah. So again, kudos to Rage.
So that's what makes Rage really important and part of the conversation. You know, that they did this for everybody else.
And I'll be blunt, what I've, you know, maybe I need to do, or maybe you know, you can direct, but I feel like their earlier stuff is fine, but you know, it's the later stuff that really is
it is
key.
Like I said, I can pick and choose the songs from those first 10 years and make, you know, a good best of type of a thing. Maybe you could take some of those songs and instead of it being 11 albums, maybe like 5 or 6 really solid ones, And then same thing, later albums too, because there's still 26 albums.
All right.
It's a lot of music.
And so, well, I don't want to cut you off, but I think, and so the last one was a band. Of course, I know Primal Fear, who are great.
Right.
But I don't know. Well, go ahead, take it away.
Sinner. So Sinner is the bass player from Primal Fear, Matt Sinner, his band that he started in the early 80s too. Their first album was in 84. No, 82, I'm sorry. Wild and Evil was 82. So I kind of do a little bit of a brief history in my article as well. But they started out real early too. But they were never a big name at all. I don't think overseas either, and especially in America. Definitely an underground band.
Yeah, like I said, that's one that escaped me. I mean, of course, I do know Primal Fear, and good band. So was Sinner? Did that predate, or is it around the same time?
As predate what?
Did it predate Primal Fear? I don't know the year. That
Primal Fear was 97, 98. And Sinner was 82 when Wild and Evil came out. So Sinner's been out since 82 and 83.
That's right. Yeah. No, you're right. Primal Fear, because they have such the classic sound. I always think of them as being older. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
They were in 90s.
But Sinner is more of just classic traditional metal, very influenced by like Accept, because they were around at the same time. Some Scorpions, a lot of Judas Priest you can hear in the early stuff. There's a lot of Thin Lizzy going on in there with the twin harmonies and with Matt's voice. He's got a very, I don't know how to explain his voice, but it's different. It's not like Primal Fear where you're going for like Judas Priest type of thing,
Right.
But those twin harmonies that they do in their songs and those melodies is so Thin Lizzy at times.
All right, I'm sold. I'll check it. I'll check out some of the stuff.
And they got a pretty decent amount of albums too. How many albums do they have? I gotta look, because they still make music to this day too. In between Primal Fear. Hold on, let me check, because I don't remember. It's a bunch. But again, I included them like Rage because there's a reason for that too. Not only they've been around since 82, but then Matt goes on and creates, he forms Primal Fear, another huge band.
Right.
And important to power metal. Right? And just metal in general. They were carrying on the traditions of Judas Priest in the 90s. Like they're like second generation. They're like the sons of Judas Priest sometimes,
Well, and yeah, if I wanted to make a comment about that. And actually this applies to all, like Primal Fear especially. Like one of my favorite Primal Fear songs, there's no slight on them because I like their original songs too, but they do an amazing cover of a Heart song. They do If Looks Could Kill, and they do it really well. And that's one of the things is, with German, just as a real quick overview, my first introduction to German metal outside of Scorpions and Accept was Creator. And Creator, of course, are pretty damn heavy and kind of brutal, kind of a brutal band. But
yeah,
German metal, like Scorpions, are almost comically melodic sometimes. And you and I have talked about this. Helloween, one of our favorite bands, but sometimes they go a little goofy, and they do huge on the melody, and that's kind of a common thing. Germans, there's a lot of humor in the music, and there's also melody. They almost always go very high on the melody, and sometimes to I don't know how to say this the right way, but sometimes to almost a Journey or AOR type of level, even
which is funny that you say that, because my reason also for talking about Sinner and Matt Sinner, somebody that should be inducted to the Metal Hall, because not only did he have Sinner and Primal Fear, but then he does Rock Meets Classic. Did you look that up?
No, I haven't checked that one out. I will.
So Rock Meets Classic is this touring band of a supergroup like Avantasia that Matt does, where they do AOR rock songs. And they have those kind of singers come in too, like the singer from Survivor sang with them. And who else? Robin Zander from Cheap Trick. So they do these concerts where they do all these rock songs and AOR rock songs with the big hooks and the big melodies. So it's always important to that metal overseas to have those hooks for people to sing.
Yeah, you did mention that in your article, to be fair. So that, yeah, that's
It's a lot of
cool.
information.
Yeah, it is a lot, but no, but yeah. So all right, well, take us. I would say, before we wrap up, take us through. I actually made a little list, but take us through some of
Okay.
the maybe
Other
since you're
bands?
talk about who we might see in your upcoming
Well,
German
you
metal
mentioned Creator. Of
hardcore.
course, I didn't forget about Creator and Sodom and Destruction and Tankard,
Tankard,
the
right?
thrash bands. And then, of
Yeah,
course, Gamma Ray, the brothers and sisters of Helloween. Of course,
right,
Blind Guardian, right? We were talking before we went on air, Axel Rudy Pell.
right,
Very, very important guitar player from Germany who has a great
right.
catalog too and a long history. Somebody else that should be talked about, which I'm probably at this point, I was doing part 2 and maybe 3 and 4. I don't know. I'm going to do part 5 for Germany.
Well, I mean, some of these bands,
Um,
like Helloween and Scorpions, both have huge family trees. Like you said, Scorpions
right,
has got MS Michael Schenker in the family tree,
right,
Uli John Roth, and Herman Z. German.
right. And his solo career, yeah.
Yeah. So there's
Mm-hmm.
so much, and like you said, Helloween, you've got Gamma Ray and Unisonic, and I guess that's the major ones. But yeah, I mean these
Yeah.
major German families. So yeah, you got your work cut out for you if you want to be complete.
I know. I was thinking about it. I might have to. I mean, I can't pick everybody, but I think I'm going to, for different reasons, like I said, for Sinner and for Rage, I'm going to pick certain bands or people from the band, like Matt Sinner, or I can't think of the name, but the singer and the bass player from Rage. Like I said before, even if it's not the whole catalog of the band or all the members that have been in the band in history, it should be somebody like the person that's been there since the beginning, right? Like
Right.
Matt from Sinner, and then he's escaping my name. The name is escaping right now. P.V. Wagner from Rage, for bringing the band along all this time and doing these things with their music and evolving and doing the orchestra,
Right.
So that's what I think I'm going to do when I do part 3 and part 4. The bands that I choose, or the people that I choose from the band, or the albums from their history, will be chosen based off of their contribution to what they've done for metal,
And all right, well, I'm going to throw some names at you because there are a couple more we
Right.
haven't touched on. I'm going to throw some at you, and I realize some of
Okay.
these are bands that maybe not be to either of our tastes, and some of them,
Right.
some of them are,
But they're probably
big.
important for one reason or another.
Right. Well, actually, there's a new band who I know you like a lot, and I like them. I know they're making a lot of waves. Is Orden Ogan? If I don't know if I pronounce it right. I know that they're probably too big to be called about Metal Hall of Fame yet, but
right. But
they're also good.
Next generation after Blind Guardian and those bands from the 90s.
Right. And then, well, I warned you I was going to bring him up. The Knight Rider himself, David Hasselhoff, of course. And then Rammstein, you can't.
Rammstein, they're huge.
Yeah, whatever you think, and I like some of their stuff. They're a big part of what the face of 90s metal was, to the record buying public. And again, if you like industrial, like, and I don't equate them with Ministry, but they're along the same lines. I mean, Rammstein.
Yeah, it's industrial, right?
They had a huge impact, and they also were ambassadors. They brought metal and industrial to the world. So kudos to them on that. I think we did mention earlier too, Ed Guy and Fantasia. We mentioned both of them.
Yes, Tobias Sammet from Ed Guy, who went on to do Advantasia. Yeah, another person, of course.
Actually, I'm gonna skip over the rest. I have others, but one more I didn't realize.
We rattled off so many already.
Yeah, I'm only gonna mention one more. And talking about metal, actually, I mean, there's some great German bands that are outside of metal. Like I really like Kraftwerk. I think they're amazing bands, so huge, so influential, so important, but just not necessarily metal. Same goes later on down the line in that side genre, the KMFDM. Really good band, and they cross the line into metal sometimes, but not necessarily. But anyway, what I was going to get, the last band I was going to mention to you, I didn't know these guys were German, is Kingdom Come.
Really?
Yeah, I did not know that they were German. Well, maybe
I knew that either.
Let me before we get called out by the real experts. Let me
let me see. I don't remember that. Let's see.
Well, should we believe Wikipedia? That's the first.
Or maybe they have a few members that were German based, and then.
Well, it says Hamburg, West Germany.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know. We'll have to do some more research then.
Maybe that'll be your article part 7. Will be Kingdom
Boy. But I'm glad we're talking about this, because they're definitely, these bands are important to the history of heavy metal. So I'm sure a lot of people, like I said, won't disagree with some of them, and maybe will question a couple of the other choices, or maybe have second guesses now after they read the article.
Yeah, and kudos to you, man. I'm not just giving you empty flattery. Kudos to you for pointing out, because Germany, I think everyone kind of acknowledges it, but it's not something that's really, I think, talked about a lot in metal, conversations. And I mean,
or
Helloween,
everybody just remembers the big names, but they don't always remember the other names and what they contribute.
And I want to go back to something I said earlier, and I think you hinted as coming up in your series, is that Creator, you can't understate their importance. Just what a
I don't think anybody would. Creator, Sodom and Destruction. Of course not.
Yeah, and by the way, kudos to Rich and me. We talked to Schmier earlier this year, and the guy's a rock star. The guy is unbelievable. But I mean, what a talent!
And they put out a great DVD too. The live attack that came out this year.
And when we talked to Schmier, I remember saying, like, he was cool. He wasn't like full of himself and being arrogant, but I kind of said, you kind of created that style of singing in metal, where there's kind of like, it's super heavy and brutal, but also kind of got some screech and scream to it.
He's got definitely personality to his voice when he sings.
Yeah.
It's like Bobby from Overkill. There's personality to the way they're singing.
Right. Yeah. So Schmier, just massively influential. I mean, and that's no disrespect to Sodom. Were great and huge, and Tankard, probably is the rounding out the big 4, but Creator and Destruction.
Rounding out the 4, yeah. And that'll be one of the other articles. I gotta decide who's gonna be in part 3 because I can't miss anyone. Or probably be Blind Guardian, Gamma Ray, maybe Axel Rudy Pell. I gotta think of who else. Maybe I'll do 3s.
And I don't know. You're doing a great job with these articles. The only thing I was going to say about that is that Creator and Destruction, they kind of contradict what I said earlier about metal being, German metal being a lot of humor and a lot of kind of sometimes goofiness, sometimes metal, like over the top with the melodic stuff. The other direction with Creator and Destruction and Sodom,
but
it's just
still had melody in their songs too, though, with those guitars and the hooks too. Sometimes definitely melody in those bands too. Yep.
But pure thrash melody. I mean,
absolutely, of course.
Right. All right, but so
cool.
This is great stuff, man. I look forward. We will do this again. What are we doing? Actually, we're putting both of us on the spot. 2021 is almost over. So Rich and I did not talk about this. So you're getting this live.
You're in top 20 lists.
Yeah, maybe you're in top 20 lists, and maybe another. I mean, we don't have any interviews just because we've both been lazy. We will get some more interviews for sure. That part of this is not going to go away.
But we'll do the top 20 within the next few weeks before the year ends.
Yeah, and maybe if we have time for one more episode, we'll do another one of our metal.
Yeah, we'll talk about one of the ones that you wrote.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
All right. I'm been fidgety, but so all right, cool, man. You did an excellent job with the articles. Guys. Everyone should go and read them. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Vinny and Peace. And I guess we might have been up against the Metal Voice also. They were doing their year-end top 20. So sorry, apologies everyone if we were.
That's cool. We'll check out their shows too.
Yeah, I absolutely. I'm looking forward. I think they did their final over there, Jimmy K. I think they had Todd Latore on, so I'm looking forward to watching that one. Anyway, cool. I'm going to shut up. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, Rich.
See you.
All right.